Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Worth Your Time, Worth Your Money, an ongoing series where I look at the opening hours of new and upcoming games. And today we're looking at the Séance of Blake Manor. This randomly just popped up in my email inbox last night. I was having a bit of a late night bender looking for something to do, and it rocked up at the perfect time because I then proceeded to sink many hours into it and kind of just ruined my sleep cycle. But here we are. Mistakes were made. Well, no, I wouldn't say that actually, because I really enjoyed it. This is a very, very cool game that is probably going to have a very low profile release. A lot will sleep on. So for my part, I'm going to shout it out. Now, it's developed by Spooky Doorway, who have done a game recently called The Dark Side Detective, which is something that's been in my periphery for years. I've never gotten around to checking it out, but I suppose the point stands that that was relatively successful from what I understand, and these guys have pedigree in doing, investigative, murder mystery, whatever you would like to call it, type couched games. Couple that with their publisher being Raw Fury, who have released quite a few bangers actually, like Star Trucker comes to mind. Blueprints, you might actually see a few similarities to this kind of first-person manner in a stylized art form. That's probably where it ends. Where that is more of a puzzler, this is absolutely more in the vein of, the Orient Express. It's a kind of Irish Poirot murder mystery investigative type thing, except it actually does something I've never seen before, but I'm incredibly thankful for, is that it's kind of lets you off the leash, gives you a couple of days to explore this manor, which is inhabited by a humongous cast of varied characters who all have their own routines, their own agendas, their own this, that, and the other. Everyone's at this manor for this seance that's about to happen in the next couple of days. You're not. You're actually a detective, like old Hercule himself, who is kind of just following a thin lead of a missing person in this manor. So you rock up right in the middle of it all and kind of keeping your head down a little bit, while all these, incredibly varied casts, and it makes sense as well. It's not like shoehorned, because this is set in bloody 1897, I think, in Western Ireland, out in the mountains. So, it'd be a bit of a stretch ordinarily to say, well, every single person is probably just a red-headed screaming Irishman, and you've got your fair share of those people. But given the nature of this sort of occult seance that is framed to welcome people from all creed, color, sex, that sort of stuff, it actually makes sense that it's sort of an international affair of the eclectic and eccentric that are interested in, this mysticism. It does an absolutely great, wonderful setup of bringing together these unusual people, and they all have their own agendas, they all have their own opinions on magic. Like, usually when you do some sort of melting pot like this, it'll be broaching politics or something like that. Different ways to slice an ideological pie. This is more people's position on magic, and your dude is a hard skeptic. He is built of facts and logic, and the game is already throwing me a lot of curveballs. I wouldn't say jump scares, but you're seeing things. You're having these weird dreams. It walks on the boundary of happenstance and actual supernatural, but it doesn't give the game away. Is something truly magical going on, or, is the event in itself playing tricks on the mind of the main protagonist? It's very clever how it's done. But yeah, my main complaint with these sort of games, because you have some staples, like the Sherlock Holmes kind of series comes to mind, and I've played a few of those over the years, but I find them often to miss more than hit. And in general, games that follow like a murder mystery plot, and again, this is general, there are probably exceptions to the rules that I have missed, but the rule, at least with the mediocre ones, is because it's so on rails, right? It does have a specific story to be told, and it has to hold the leash. It has to stay tight, because often these sort of, twists and turns will jump the shark necessarily just to keep the player guessing, and keep them engaged for much longer than even a movie runtime. And you could also argue that some of the weaker Orient Express type framed, Agatha Christie murder mystery things do the same thing. They really have to suspend disbelief to make make the twists work and land, and it really is the hallmark of a good or bad writer, or rather a writer not at their strongest. Anyway, my point is that when you try and video gamify something like that and turn it into like a bloody 12 to 14-hour experience, that carrot on the stick, it's really got to work. So what this is doing to overcome it for me, as we alluded to, is that you've rocked up, you're investigating this missing lady, you get a mini tutorial to give you a bit of an idea of how it works, because you rock up in the middle of the night and you sort of snoop around and investigate, but then they let you off proper by the next day onwards. In the couple of days leading up to the seance, it's this sort of boogeyman hanging in the background. It's actually building excitement and tension. I'm really keen to see what happens with this seance, where it goes. But generally speaking, you don't advance time by moving around. The world's your oyster to an extent. You can go and open doors, right? There are certain places you can and can't get in because of locks. I've managed to steal and find a few keys to get me places I shouldn't. But that's just the thing. You kind of let off the leash into this mansion, into this manor, to snoop and poke and prod and investigate, and it has all this stats and everything like that on the back end for all the different characters. But when you interact with people, whether it's analyzing their looks and their behavior, do they have cracked glasses, are their hands jittering for some reason, to even just conversation topics related to evidence that you've collected, which could be all sorts of things from, rumors from other guests to actual physical hard evidence, and the game makes it very easy for you to kind of just punch through them, almost visual novel like. But every time you do anything, look at a painting, ask a person about a book, whatever, it advances time by 1 minute, and you've got time at the top of the center of the screen. And at the end of each hour, every character will move to a different room, right? So they're all running on their own schedule. It's fixed, it's not procedural, but I think you can actually impact it depending on what you do. I've already talked a couple of people out of going to the seance at the end. I don't want to ruin as to why, but one of them was a bit grisly, to be honest. It's very interesting. So I guess one of the emergent subplots while I'm looking for this missing lady is to potentially talk people back from going to the seance. But it is old Victorian as anything, right? Breakfast is served at 9 a.m. and I went to breakfast, and for a chunk of time it sat me down just with a random couple of guests so that I could have a chat with them. There's a masked ball and the ballroom's closed off for preparations for that, and so I'm kind of excited to see what that's about. There's a maze you can go through. Different people are doing talks in the drawing room, and they're all scheduled in, like I think at 11 a.m. the actual inheritor, the Marquess of the Manor, Mr. Blake himself, is holding some sort of historical talk. There's some weird research system where you can unlock information through the library, and all through this, each person themselves have their own sub problems that they're trying to solve in the form of like a hypothesis, which kind of reminds me of, now I don't play things like DS or Switch, not really these days, but I did play the DS a bit back in the day, and sometimes you'd have your more investigative little Ace Attorney adjacent Danganronpa, dare I say. Yeah, that's right, I've played that one, I love that game. But it actually evokes that kind of feel in that, you will have this huge grid of information laid out, and there will be keywords, and you'll have to put, a Cluedo adjacent. It was Thingo with this, with that, and this was their motivation, right? And so you sort of, once you piece together enough information, you can form a hypothesis on that person's agenda, what they're up to. I know I'm talking very broadly in platitudes, but I don't want to spoil any. But yeah, ultimately you're just looking for evidence, talking to people, and then essentially confronting them when you figure out what their plan is, what's going on there, and from that you can make enemies and allies, and it's just so clever, and it feels really rich and deep, and dare I say kind of open, like open world within its arena that it's in, that they've given me a couple of days, ticking 1 minute at a time, to just investigate how I see fit. Do I break into someone's room and find their diary with their routine in there? Because then that goes into my calendar in turn, and I can keep track of where they are and where they aren't. But hunting down people, you don't just know where everyone is at every given time. You have to interact with them. It's like, oh, what do you think you're going to be doing for the rest of the afternoon? Well, here you go. Tick, tick, tick. These are where I'm going to be. And it's just really fascinating and engaging, and a good example of how you can take the better parts of a visual novel. Can't believe I'm saying that. But generally speaking, I'm very skeptical and negative towards visual novels because often, not only are they a sad excuse for gameplay, they're usually just like a PowerPoint presentation clicking through, hoping that their writing will carry the day. But the phenomena is that if you're a deluded enough of a developer or writer to think that your story can carry where gameplay cannot, usually that's actually a red flag indicator that your story and writing ability is piss weak also. And that's sort of the silver bullet of a lot of visual novels. They forego gameplay for their story, but their story is not as strong as they seem to think it is in their fictional world. Anyway, so this is really good. It puts in an actual gameplay loop that is interesting and lets you go and poke and prod. There's a lot of voice acting. There's a lot of different eclectic characters. It's not really pushing any agendas or anything like that I can tell. It's just a really well-written, well-considered, huge space with a lot of info and a lot of moving parts for you to poke and prod and try and get to the bottom of what is a very compelling mystery. What a delight of a game. I'm glad I took the time to have a look. You should think about checking it out if you find any of this interesting. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.